When Marcus realized the driver thought he was an FBI agent, he knew the situation had become serious because real FBI agents were looking for this man. Marcus Chen stood at the entrance to a gas station outside Phoenix, Arizona, watching the desert heat create shimmering waves on the asphalt. He'd been waiting for a ride for 90 minutes, and the late afternoon sun was beginning to make him seriously consider finding an air-conditioned place to wait until evening. His water bottle was nearly empty, and the next major city was still 60 miles away through empty desert highway. Marcus was starting to think he might have to spring for a bus ticket when he heard the sound of a car pulling into the station. But Marcus had no idea that accepting this ride would put him in the middle of a federal manhunt. A silver Honda Accord pulled up to the gas pumps, and the driver, a nervous-looking man in his 30s with dark hair and sunglasses, kept glancing around as if he were watching for someone. After filling his tank, the man approached Marcus. "You need a ride?" he asked, his voice carrying a slight tremor of anxiety. "Yeah, I'm heading toward Flagstaff if you're going that direction," Marcus replied. "Perfect. I'm going right through there. I'm Steve, by the way." Marcus climbed into the passenger seat, immediately noticing that Steve seemed unusually tense. His hands were shaking slightly as he started the car, and he kept checking his mirrors obsessively. "Thanks for stopping, Steve. I'm Marcus." As they pulled back onto the highway, Steve's behavior became increasingly strange. He drove exactly the speed limit, never varying even by a mile per hour. He avoided making eye contact with other drivers, and every few minutes he would glance at Marcus with an expression that seemed part gratitude and part suspicion. "Long drive ahead of us," Marcus said, trying to make conversation. "About 2 hours," Steve replied, but his voice was tight with stress. "You seem a little on edge. Everything okay?" Steve was quiet for a long moment before responding. "It's been a difficult week. Work stress, you know." But there was something about Steve's anxiety that felt like more than work stress. As they drove through the Arizona desert, Steve kept checking his rearview mirror and occasionally taking seemingly random exits, only to get back on the highway a few miles later. "Steve, are we being followed or something?" Marcus asked after the third unnecessary detour. Steve glanced at him sharply. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you're driving like someone who's trying to avoid being tracked." Steve pulled over at a rest stop and turned to face Marcus directly. "Listen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you really just a hitchhiker, or are you working for them?" Marcus felt a chill of unease. Working for who?
"The FBI. The federal agents who've been following me for the past month."
Marcus stared at Steve, trying to process what he was hearing. "Steve, I'm just a guy who needed a ride. I'm not an FBI agent." That's exactly what an undercover agent would say. Steve reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device that looked like a radio scanner. "I've been monitoring their communications. They've been tracking me across 3 states, and they know I'm in this area." But Steve's next revelation would make the situation even more complicated. "Marcus, or whoever you really are, I want you to know that I never meant for anyone to get hurt. What I did was wrong, but I was desperate." "What did you do?" Steve pulled out a folder from under his seat and showed Marcus documents that appeared to be bank records and financial statements. "I embezzled money from the company I worked for. $2 million over the course of 3 years. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He was trapped in a car with a federal fugitive who believed Marcus was an undercover agent sent to capture him. "Steve, I swear to you, I'm not FBI. I'm just a hitchhiker who needed a ride." "Then why did you ask if we were being followed? How did you know to look for surveillance techniques?" Marcus realized that his innocent question had confirmed Steve's paranoid suspicions. "I asked because your driving behavior seemed nervous. That's all." But Steve wasn't convinced. "The timing is too convenient. A hitchhiker just happens to need a ride exactly when I'm passing through Phoenix. Someone exactly matching the description of the undercover agents they've been using." "What description?" Steve showed Marcus photos on his phone. Surveillance images of young men in casual clothes who he claimed were federal agents who had been following him. Young, mid-20s, traveling alone, usually carrying a backpack. That's exactly what you look like. Marcus studied the photos and had to admit that he did bear a resemblance to some of the men Steve was convinced were agents. Steve, those could be photos of anyone. Lots of young guys travel with backpacks. Or they could be photos of federal agents who've been assigned to track me down. Marcus realized he was dealing with someone whose guilt and paranoia had created an elaborate conspiracy theory in which every encounter was potentially a trap. But then, Steve's radio scanner crackled to life with a transmission that made both men freeze. This is Agent Rodriguez to base. Subject, vehicle spotted heading north on Highway 17. Silver Honda Accord, license plate ending in 729. Requesting backup units to establish perimeter. Steve stared at the radio in horror. They found me. Marcus looked at Steve's license plate through the side mirror. It ended in Steve, that transmission was about us. There really are FBI agents looking for you. But instead of surrendering, Steve made a decision that would put both their lives at risk. He floored the accelerator and began driving recklessly, weaving through traffic and taking dangerous turns on mountain roads. Steve, you're going to get us both killed. Pull over and surrender. I can't go to prison. I have a family. As they careened around mountain curves at dangerous speeds, Marcus realized that Steve's guilt and desperation had made him completely irrational. Steve, if you really have a family, then think about them. Do you want them to remember you as someone who died running from the law? I stole money to pay for my daughter's cancer treatment. The insurance company denied the claim, and I was watching her die. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Steve wasn't just a common criminal. He was a desperate father who had made terrible choices to save his child's life. Steve, that's something a jury would understand. That's something that could get you a reduced sentence. You don't understand. I forged documents, created fake accounts, laundered money through multiple banks. This isn't just embezzlement, it's federal fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. I'm looking at 20 years minimum. But Marcus noticed something that gave him an idea. The radio scanner was still broadcasting FBI communications, and he could hear agents coordinating a roadblock ahead of them. Steve, listen to the radio. They're setting up a roadblock 2 miles ahead. If you keep driving, we're going to crash into a wall of police cars. Steve listened to the transmissions, and Marcus could see him starting to realize that his escape attempt was futile. There's nowhere to run, Marcus said gently. But if you surrender now, peacefully, that shows remorse and cooperation. That matters to judges and juries. Steve slowed the car and pulled over to the side of the road, his hands shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. I just wanted to save my daughter's life, he whispered. And you did, didn't you? Is she okay now? Steve nodded, tears streaming down his face. She's in remission. The treatment worked. Then you succeeded in the most important thing. Everything else can be worked out. As they sat on the side of the mountain road, FBI vehicles began surrounding them. Agent Rodriguez approached the car cautiously, his weapon drawn but pointed down. Stephen Walsh, this is the FBI. Exit the vehicle slowly with your hands visible. Steve looked at Marcus one final time. I'm sorry I dragged you into this, and thank you for talking me out of doing something even stupider. Steve got out of the car and surrendered peacefully to the agents. Agent Rodriguez approached Marcus after Steve was in custody. Are you injured? Did he threaten you? No, he was actually pretty decent for someone who thought I was an undercover agent trying to arrest him. Agent Rodriguez looked confused. He thought you were one of our agents? He was convinced I was FBI. He showed me surveillance photos of agents he claimed had been following him. Agent Rodriguez examined Steve's phone and radio scanner. Mr. Chen, Stephen Walsh, has been suffering from severe paranoia since we began investigating him 6 months ago. Those photos aren't of FBI agents, they're pictures he took of random young men he encountered during his travels. He became convinced that every young person he saw was a federal agent. The scope of Steve's mental deterioration became clear. His guilt over the embezzlement had created a paranoid fantasy in which he was constantly surrounded by undercover agents. "What's going to happen to him?" Marcus asked. "He'll face federal charges, but his cooperation today and the circumstances surrounding his crimes will be taken into consideration." But Agent Rodriguez had more information about Steve's situation. "Mr. Chen, Stephen Walsh's case is complicated. He embezzled the money to pay for his daughter's cancer treatment after his insurance company denied coverage for experimental therapy. The treatment saved her life, but the way he obtained the money was still illegal. Will that matter in court? It should. Federal judges have discretion in sentencing, especially when the motive wasn't personal greed but family desperation." Agent Rodriguez showed Marcus the scope of the investigation. "We've been tracking Walsh for months, but he wasn't a violent criminal. He was just a father who made desperate choices and then couldn't figure out how to make it right." Marcus learned that Steve had actually been trying to return the money gradually, making anonymous payments back to his former company over the past year. He wasn't trying to keep the money, he was trying to give it back without getting caught. The FBI investigation revealed that Steve had returned almost half of the stolen funds and had been working multiple jobs to generate the money for repayment. In some ways, his paranoia actually helped us track him. He kept detailed records of his movements and financial transactions because he was convinced we were monitoring everything anyway. 3 months later, Marcus received a letter from Steve Walsh. Steve had been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, but with good behavior and his cooperation, he would likely serve less than 3 years. More importantly, his daughter remained in remission, and his wife had been allowed to keep their house and savings. "Marcus," the letter read, "I know you're not really FBI, but you probably saved my life that day by convincing me to surrender peacefully. If I had kept running, I would have crashed or been shot, and my daughter would have lost her father entirely. Thank you for being kind to a scared, desperate man who had lost his way." The letter included updates about his daughter's health and his wife's efforts to maintain their family while he served his sentence. "I'm using my time in prison to get counseling for the paranoia and anxiety that made me see enemies everywhere. I want to be a better father and husband when I get out." Marcus continued hitchhiking, but the experience with Steve had taught him something important about the difference between dangerous criminals and desperate people who had made terrible choices. Steve wasn't evil, Marcus reflects now. He was a father who would have done anything to save his child's life, and when legitimate options failed him, he made illegal choices. That doesn't excuse what he did, but it explains why he did it. Marcus learned that the American healthcare system creates situations where law-abiding people sometimes feel they have no choice but to break the law to save their families. Steve's real crime wasn't embezzlement. It was being born in a country where a child's life can depend on her parents' ability to navigate insurance bureaucracy and afford experimental treatments. But Marcus also learned something about the power of human connection in crisis situations. When Steve was convinced I was an FBI agent, he could have hurt me or used me as a hostage. Instead, he talked to me. He shared his story, his fears, his love for his daughter. That human connection is what ultimately convinced him to surrender peacefully. The silver Honda Accord that had seemed like just another ride through Arizona had actually been a mobile prison for a man tormented by guilt and paranoia. But Marcus's presence in that car, even though it was based on a case of mistaken identity, had provided Steve with the human connection he needed to make the right choice in his final moments of freedom. Sometimes the most important conversation you'll ever have is with someone who thinks you're someone else entirely. And sometimes the greatest service you can provide is simply being present when someone is making the most important decision of their life. Marcus had gotten into that car as a hitchhiker looking for a ride to Flagstaff. He'd gotten out as someone who understood that the line between law-abiding citizen and federal fugitive can be thinner than any of us want to believe. The FBI agents who had been tracking Steve Walsh weren't pursuing a career criminal. They were trying to arrest a father whose love for his daughter had led him down a path he never intended to walk. And Marcus learned that sometimes the most dangerous person you'll meet on the road isn't someone who wants to hurt you. It's someone who's so scared and desperate that they can't tell the difference between help and harm. Steve's paranoia had convinced him that every young traveler was a federal agent, but his humanity had kept him from treating Marcus as an enemy, even when he believed Marcus was there to destroy his life. In the end, that humanity was what saved them both. But the story didn't end with Steve's arrest. 6 months later, Marcus received an unexpected phone call from Agent Rodriguez. "Mr. Chen, I wanted to update you on Stephen Walsh's case. There have been some developments you should know about." Marcus had been wondering how Steve was adjusting to prison life and whether his daughter was still healthy. "Is everything okay with his family?" "Actually, that's why I'm calling. The insurance company that denied coverage for his daughter's treatment is now under federal investigation for fraudulent claim denials." Agent Rodriguez explained that Steve's case had triggered a broader investigation into the insurance company's practices. "We discovered that they had been systematically denying coverage for expensive treatments, even when those treatments were medically necessary and covered under their policies. The investigation revealed that the insurance company had saved millions of dollars by illegally denying claims, knowing that most families wouldn't have the resources to fight lengthy legal battles while their loved ones were dying. Steve wasn't the only desperate parent they drove to extreme measures. We've identified at least 30 other families who were victims of this scheme. But the most significant development was still to come. "Mr. Chen, because of the circumstances surrounding Steve's crimes and the insurance company's illegal practices, his sentence is being reconsidered." The federal judge had agreed to review Steve's case in light of the new evidence about the insurance fraud that had precipitated his desperate actions. The judge is considering reducing his sentence to time served plus community service, given that he was essentially victimized by the same company he stole from. Marcus felt a surge of relief for Steve and his family. What about the money he embezzled? That's another interesting development. The insurance company has agreed to pay a $50 million settlement to families whose claims were wrongfully denied. Steve's daughter will receive full coverage for her ongoing treatment, and the family will be compensated for the medical expenses they incur. Agent Rodriguez paused before sharing the most surprising news. Steve has also volunteered to work with federal prosecutors to help identify other healthcare fraud schemes. His experience with the insurance system and his financial background make him uniquely qualified to spot the kind of manipulation that victimized his family. Marcus learned that Steve's case had become a catalyst for healthcare fraud reform and had led to criminal charges against several insurance company executives. But there was one more unexpected development. 2 weeks later, Marcus received a call from Steve himself, who had been released on supervised probation pending his resentencing hearing. "Marcus, I wanted to thank you personally for what you did that day, but I also wanted to ask you something." Steve explained that he was working with a non-profit organization that helped families navigate insurance disputes and medical billing issues. "We're looking for people who understand what it's like to be in crisis situations, people who can stay calm and help others make good decisions under pressure." Steve was offering Marcus a job as a crisis counselor for families facing healthcare emergencies. "You talked me down from making the worst decision of my life. Maybe you could help other families before they reach that point of desperation." Marcus was intrigued by the opportunity, but he had concerns about his qualifications. "Steve, I don't have any formal training in counseling or healthcare advocacy. You have something more valuable. You know how to connect with people who are scared and desperate. You know how to see the humanity in someone even when they're acting irrationally." Steve explained that the organization provided training and support, but they needed people with natural empathy and crisis management instincts. "Most of our clients are good people who are facing impossible choices because the healthcare system has failed them. They need advocates who understand that desperation can make anyone consider doing things they never thought they would do." Marcus decided to take the job, seeing it as a way to use his experience with Steve to help prevent other families from reaching that same point of desperation. The work proved to be both challenging and rewarding. Marcus's first case involved a mother whose insurance company was refusing to cover her son's insulin, claiming it was a pre-existing condition even though the boy had been covered under the same policy for 3 years. "Mrs. Patterson, I understand you're considering taking out loans against your house to pay for your son's medication," Marcus said during their phone consultation. "What choice do I have? If I don't get him insulin, he'll die. If I lose the house, at least he'll be alive." Marcus helped Mrs. Patterson file appeals, connect with patient advocacy organizations, and ultimately get her insurance company to reverse their denial. "You saved my family from financial ruin," she told Marcus afterward, "but more than that, you helped me see that I wasn't alone in this fight." Over the next year, Marcus helped dozens of families navigate healthcare crises without resorting to desperate measures like theft, fraud, or dangerous debt. But the most meaningful case came when Marcus received a call from a man whose situation eerily paralleled Steve. "My name is Robert Kim, and my daughter needs a bone marrow transplant that our insurance won't cover. I've been thinking about doing something I know is wrong, but I don't know what else to do." Marcus recognized the desperation in Robert's voice, the same desperation he'd heard from Steve that day in Arizona. "Robert, I want you to know that feeling desperate doesn't make you a bad person, but there are options we haven't explored yet." Marcus spent 3 hours on the phone with Robert, walking him through every legal avenue for getting his daughter's treatment covered, connecting him with charitable organizations, and helping him understand his rights under federal health care laws. "I was ready to rob a bank," Robert admitted later. "But you showed me that there were people willing to fight for my daughter without me having to destroy my life." Robert's daughter received her transplant through a combination of insurance coverage, charitable assistance, and community fundraising, all arranged through the advocacy network that Marcus had helped her family access. Steve's influence on Marcus's new career was evident in every case. "Steve taught me that healthcare desperation is a unique kind of crisis," Marcus explains. "When someone you love is dying and you have the power to save them but not the money, it creates a moral emergency that can override every ethical principle you've ever held." Marcus learned to recognize the warning signs of families approaching that breaking point. The combination of medical urgency, financial pressure, and systemic failures that had driven Steve to embezzlement. "My job is to intervene before families reach the point where crime seems like their only option." The organization Marcus worked for tracked their success not just in insurance appeals won, but in families who avoided financial ruin or legal trouble while getting their loved ones the care they needed. 1 year after Steve's arrest, Marcus was invited to speak at a healthcare reform conference about the connection between medical debt and financial crimes. Stephen Walsh wasn't a criminal who happened to have a sick daughter, Marcus told the audience. He was a father who became a criminal because our healthcare system failed his daughter. Marcus shared statistics showing that medical debt was a factor in over 60% of personal bankruptcies and was increasingly linked to fraud, theft, and other financial crimes. When we force families to choose between their loved one's life and their own financial survival, we're creating conditions that push good people toward bad choices. But Marcus also shared success stories from his advocacy work, showing how early intervention and proper support could prevent healthcare crises from becoming legal disasters. Steve attended the conference and spoke about his own experience. "I want everyone to understand that I'm not trying to excuse what I did. I broke the law, and I deserve to face consequences. But I also want people to understand that the version of myself who stole that money isn't who I really am." Steve described the psychological toll of watching his daughter suffer while fighting insurance bureaucracy. "You start to feel like the system is designed to let your child die for profit. And when you feel like that, stealing money to save her life starts to feel less like a crime and more like a moral imperative." Steve's experience had taught him that healthcare reform wasn't just about policy. It was about preventing the kind of desperation that had nearly destroyed his family. If we want people to respect the law, we need laws that respect people's fundamental need to protect their families. The conference led to policy discussions about healthcare legislation, insurance regulation, and support systems for families facing medical crises. But for Marcus, the most important outcome was personal. That day in Steve's car taught me that my hitchhiking experiences weren't just about collecting stories. They were about learning how to recognize and respond to people in crisis. Marcus realized that his years of accepting rides from strangers had given him unique insights into human behavior under stress. Every time I got into a car with someone, I was practicing the skills I'd need to help families navigate their worst moments. Marcus continued to work in healthcare advocacy while still occasionally hitchhiking, now understanding that his travels were preparing him for a larger purpose. Steve Walsh completed his community service and became a full-time healthcare advocate, using his financial expertise to help families understand their insurance options and medical billing rights. I can't undo what I did, Steve says now, but I can use what I learned about the healthcare system's failures to help other families avoid the desperation that nearly destroyed mine. Steve's daughter remained in remission, and the family was able to rebuild their financial stability with the insurance settlement and Steve's new career. The silver Honda Accord that had seemed like a trap when Marcus first got in had actually been a vehicle for redemption, both for Steve, who found a path back from his darkest moment, and for Marcus, who discovered his calling as an advocate for families in crisis. Agent Rodriguez, who had overseen Steve's arrest, later commented on the case's broader impact. Stephen Walsh's case changed how we investigate healthcare-related financial crimes. We now look more carefully at the circumstances that drive people to desperate measures, and we work with advocacy organizations to address systemic problems rather than just arresting the victims of those problems. The mistaken identity that had initially terrified both Marcus and Steve had ultimately led to a deeper understanding of the human cost of healthcare failures and the importance of intervention before desperation leads to destruction. Sometimes the most dangerous situation you'll encounter isn't with someone who wants to hurt you. It's with someone who's been hurt so badly by the system that they can't see any legal way to save the people they love. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is help someone realize that there are always more options than crime or surrender, even when the system seems designed to offer only those two choices.